I have a lot of scrap oak laying around the shop from 2 dining tables that I built last year, and I knew I wanted to build something out of them, but I just didn't know what. My biggest problem is that all the wood was different widths. So I had some 8/4, 6/4, and 5/4, and I didn't really know what to do with all that. I decided to take all that wood and mill it down to 3/4 of an inch for a vanity upstairs. I'm going to use it for the face frame and the cabinet doors. The only issue is, as you take this wood and make it thinner, it sometimes has a tendency to twist, warp, bow. So you want to do it over a couple of days, take it down to about an inch, see how it's going to respond, and then after it's sat for a couple of days, then you can go in and mill it to your final thickness of 3/4 of an inch. Once all my wood was milled up to the appropriate dimensions, it was time to get started on this vanity. And the first thing I needed to do was build the carcass for the vanity, and that would mostly be made out of plywood, but I did decide to glue up this oak panel, and that will be the right side of the vanity that is right next to the toilet. And I decided to do this out of oak because I thought it would look nice if you're, using the bathroom, pooping, and you look over and you see a nice oak panel instead of this regular old plywood. And I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about the carcass construction because there's already like 100 videos on YouTube about how to build cabinets, so we're going to focus more on the design of this cabinet and less on the screw this board into that board and then cut this board to this length. But this will give you a good idea, and we'll run through it real quick. I cut all my panels over at the table saw, and of course you got to cut something wrong. I cut this piece a little too short, as you can tell, but I didn't know at this time I could actually use this later on in the project, and it would fit perfectly for, well, I'll tell you later. We'll call it a happy accident for now. Once I get all my panels cut, I cut the notches for the toe kicks, and then I bring them back over the table saw, cut a 1/4 inch dadoed groove in the back. This will be for the back panel. And then I use pocket holes to attach the whole carcass together. And once you get it all screwed down, you slide this back panel in place, and it's actually rock solid. I did check the fit of the vanity top to the base just to be sure everything fit like it was supposed to before I got too far into this project, and luckily it did. So the next step of this project is to work on the face frame. For the face frame, I used these strips of oak and I cut them all down to 1.5 inches over at the table saw, and then once I got them all cut, I moved over to the miter saw and cut them into the appropriate lengths. The design for this vanity, I wanted to have a cabinet on the left, a cabinet on the right, and then 3 drawers right down the middle. So once I get all my pieces for my face frame cut and I get my spacing figured out, I use pocket holes again and I screw it all together. And then once I get the face frame all put together, I bring the whole face frame over and attach it to the carcass using glue and brad nails. And this is plenty strong once that glue dries. I also go ahead and add the toe kick to the cabinet using glue and brad nails for this as well. At this point in the project, the vanity was really starting to come together, but I knew I would need something to attach my drawer slides to later on in the project. And this is where we go back to that happy accident. That board that I messed up, it was the perfect measurement to fit in there. So I cut it in half over the table saw, slid the 2 panels in, and then just brad nailed it in place. And this would give me a divider to keep stuff from falling out of the cabinet into the drawers, and it would give me somewhere to attach my drawer slides later on. And with all that, the base of the cabinet is officially finished, and this thing's getting really heavy. This is going to be fun to bring upstairs. Oh well, that's a worry for another day. A few days ago, I finished the cabinet carcass for the vanity that's going to go in our upstairs bathroom. And I kind of have a cool idea for the cabinet doors and drawer faces, but I've never done this before as far as the design that I'm going to do. So we're going to see what happens. And I'm going to let you see the whole process, and either it's going to be really funny me messing up, or it's going to come out really cool. So we'll see what happens. The first thing that I needed to do was get the 2 panels that I glued up the day before out of clamps, and these panels will later be the centers for the shaker style doors that I'm going to use for this project. And for the design, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to go with a reeded style panel in the center of the shaker door. And to do that, I needed to route out some grooves in the panels, but I needed to be sure the panels were going to be rock solid and didn't move. So I ended up brad nailing the panels to a piece of plywood and then clamped that plywood to my workbench. The next thing I needed to do was get my router set up. And to make the reeded design in these panels, I ended up using a bit called a point cutting roundover bit with a 1/4 inch radius. And it looks like a double roundover bit. And the way you make the reeded effect is you take multiple passes and you move over 1/2 inch at a time, and then every time you move over it makes a perfect half circle. At first I tried to use my router with the dust collection hooked up to it, but I quickly realized that the more things I have attached to the router, the harder it was to keep it tight up against the edge with my edge guide. So I quickly ditched the dust collection and made a huge mess. I opted for better results, but 0 dust collection. And I think it was worth it. The results came out so much better with no dust collection, and it actually made the process a little bit easier. I would say this process is not hard, it's just very tedious. You want to be sure you keep that edge guide tight up against the edge of your panel and try to keep your router under control the whole time. The next problem I ran into was my edge guide wasn't long enough to cut all the grooves. So I ended up having to switch over to a straight edge clamp to the panels and work my way across that way. And this works the same way. You clamp it down, cut your groove, move over 1/2 inch, and cut another groove. And this process took a lot longer than I thought it was going to. I thought I could get this knocked out in an hour or two, but it ended up taking me almost 4 hours to cut all these grooves. It ended up being 41 grooves total through solid oak, so it took a lot longer than I expected. But whenever I cut that final groove, I was so glad to be done. And my back was hurting so bad. Once I had all the grooves cut in my panels, I then had to pry them off of the plywood, and I just used a chisel to do this. Now it's time to move on to the rails and stiles, and for that I went straight over to the vanity, took measurements, and ended up adding 1 inch to all my measurements, and this would give me a 1/2 inch overhang. Then it was over to the miter saw to get everything cut, and then I lay out all the rails and stiles just to be sure I have enough material for everything. Once that was all cut, it was over to the table saw to cut the 1/4 inch dado that the panel will later slide into. The easiest way to ensure that you get this groove right in the center of your board is to cut the groove, spin the board around, and then take another pass. This ensures that groove is right in the center of your board. And then to cut the tongues onto your rails, I set the fence of my table saw to the thickness of that 1/4 inch groove that I cut in all the boards, and then raised the height of my table saw blade to 1/4 inch. And I used my miter gauge to take off all the wood on the top of the board, flip it over, take off all the wood on the bottom of the board, and then spin the whole board around, do the same thing on the other side, and that gives me 2 perfect tongues. Then I needed to get my panels cut down to the appropriate sizes, and for the smaller panels I cut these over at the miter saw, and the larger panel I cut it on the table saw. I used my miter gauge to square up the edge of this larger panel, and then used the fence to cut it down to the appropriate size. Then I cut a 1/4 inch tongue all the way around the panel that will slide into the dadoed grooves in my rails and stiles. And to cut this, I set the fence up to the depth of the dado groove and used my miter gauge to take multiple passes until I had the tongues cut to the appropriate lengths. Once I had all my pieces cut, it was finally time to assemble a door face and see what these cabinets were going to look like. And I have to admit, this came out exactly how I wanted it to. The reeds were spaced out perfectly to where there wasn't like a half reed in the center. They set flush with the rails and stiles, and everything just went together really smoothly. So I was very happy with the way this came out. And I think it looks really good too. So once I get them all dry assembled, I then just take off the sides, put a little glue and clamp them up, and then put them off to the side. And I have to admit, this was a really long day in the shop. I'm tired. Anyway, the next day I was right back out in the shop, little wardrobe change, and I had to get the cabinet doors finished. For this, I couldn't use the miter gauge to cut the tongues onto the panels because it was just too big. So I set my fence and blade to where I could just take one pass and then flip the panel, take another pass, flip it, and then take another pass. And this cut a perfect 1/4 inch tongue all the way around the panel, and that would slide into the 1/4 inch groove that I had cut in all my rails and stiles. When it comes to assembling the doors, I did this the same way. Glued the rails and stiles, slid in the panel, and then glued on the last board. I think this is a stile. Maybe it's a rail. I don't know, that's kind of confusing. Anyway, I get it glued on, clamped, and then move both the doors off to the side to dry. While my doors are drying, I go ahead and start working on my drawer boxes. For this, I get measurements straight from the vanity again, and then this time I'm going to take an inch away all the way around. And when you take an inch away, you can have a 1/2 inch clearance all the way around. That gives perfect spacing for the drawer slides that I have, and then also it makes it easy to install. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. For the drawer boxes, I make it completely out of plywood, and I use pocket holes to attach it all together. So I cut the plywood at the table saw, and then chop it down to the right length at the miter saw, and then I do add a 1/4 inch dado groove to the bottom for the bottom panel to slide into, and then just simply pocket screw it all together. This is just super simple drawer boxes. I guess the only way you can make it easier is if you just brad nailed it together, but I didn't want to see any brad nails on the side of my cabinet, so that's why I use pocket holes. When it comes to adding the drawer slides, I simply mark the center of the drawer box and then the center of the actual drawer on the vanity and attach the hardware straight to the center. And then because I made it an inch shorter, when you slide the drawer into the vanity, you will have a perfect 1/2 inch clearance all the way around. And that's just how I do all my drawer slides. Now that I had my drawers installed, I needed to get back to work on the cabinet doors. So at this point, the glue was dry, so I took them all out of clamps, and I had to get everything sanded. And that means I have to sand all 41 of those grooves that I talked about earlier. But I'm not going to bore you with that. Just know it took a while too. Once I got everything sanded, I did go and add a round over to all the drawers and the cabinet doors just to make it a little more finished. Once I had everything sanded and prepped, it was time to move on to finish. And for finish, I decided to try something new. I went with a wood bleach, and I used the Zinsser 2-part solution. And I decided to do this because this oak has a reddish tinge, and it tends to look pink when you put polyurethane straight on it. So I wanted to lighten the wood and try to get rid of as much of that pink and red tone as I could. The way this product works is you put solution A on, wait about 10 minutes for hardwoods, 5 minutes for softwoods, and then you put solution B on immediately after. And you want to be sure the wood is still a little damp whenever you put solution B on. Chemically, I don't know how this works, but once it dries, it lightens the wood a whole lot. And the wood bleach did a really good job of getting rid of those red tones. But just a disclaimer, I did some test boards the night before, and I didn't wear gloves, and then I started feeling some like tingling in my hands, and then I looked down and my hands were solid white, and then I read the bottle for solution A that says may cause severe burns. So then I immediately ran inside and washed my hands for 10 minutes. And I did it for like an actual 10 minutes. Like I set a timer and everything because my hands were actually burning. So if you're going to use this product, be sure to wear gloves. After I burned myself, I decided it'd probably be a good idea to go ahead and read the instructions. And the instruction says to allow 24 hours for the wood bleach to dry. So I let it sit overnight. And then the next day I came in and lightly sanded everything because the wood bleach had popped the grain. And once I got everything sanded, I went ahead and attached my drawer faces to the drawer boxes. And to do this, I clamped it in place and just screwed it in from behind. Then I decided to go ahead and drill the holes for my door hinges and get those installed. And then I decided to go ahead and put everything in place to see what this vanity is going to look like. And I thought I made a big mistake here, but luckily the boss came over and was trying to tell me that I messed up. And after I figured that out, with her help, I put the drawer in the right place and everything fit perfect. Then I screwed the doors in place and I could finally see what this vanity is going to look like. Now that it's all put together, I need to take it back apart to put polyurethane on. The polyurethane I decided to go with is a wipe-on warm satin, and I did this to bring a little bit of warmth out of the wood because I thought it would help tie in with the gold hardware that I'll apply later. Once the polyurethane was dry, it was time to attach the drawer pulls and the door handles. These handles I got off of Amazon, and I'll leave a link below if you want to get some too. These are super simple. You just put them in place and screw them in. It's literally that easy. You don't have to drill holes and drill through. You just put it where you want it, screw it in from behind. Once this cabinet was completely finished, I needed to bring it inside. And to bring it inside, I carried it from the shop all the way over to the house. Struggled to get up the stairs with it. Once I got it up the stairs, I shimmied into the bathroom with it. I did have to cut 2 holes in the back for the plumbing to fit through. Once those holes were cut, I slid it into place. To anchor it, I screwed it into the studs. Then I put the vanity top on, and I finally got to peel off this plastic, which is super satisfying. And then the last thing to do was add my drawers and then my cabinet doors. And with that, this vanity is officially finished.